What is going on, Dolphins? It is your boy Dillon, and I am here for my post-game analysis for the Miami Dolphins versus New York Jets at Hard Rock Stadium that just wrapped up. And look, there was a lot of good. Most importantly, we won. Fuck yeah, hell yeah. Because again, look, I was not one of those. Unfortunately, for quite a bit of this season and prior to the season, it looked like we had a substantial chance of going 0-16, and I thought that the probability of that was very high. But we managed to, get this win today, and so I'm super excited about that because I was never one of the 0-16ers. I never wanted that to happen. I want us to win every single game. I am not on board with the tanking and so on and so forth. And so that is spectacular. There is some bad and some sizable bad, right? And so, but in this game, I think this game definitively shows that the players are playing their fucking hearts out. But there is more significant evidence in this game that the coaching staff tried to do as many favors for the Jets as possible and tried to help them out and tried to give them opportunities to win this game. I'll get into that in a minute. I definitely did take notes and so on and so forth. There's a lot to get to though. But also, and so at the end of the day, from my perspective, the difference in this game is three things. One, the Jets are a bad team. They're not a good team, and they have a lot of problems in the front office and so on and so forth. There's a lot of internal strife and struggles going on, which, again, I think it's absurd that Adam Gase is getting the blame for it, of course, though, and unfortunately, it could, hurt his abilities to remain the head coach. I think, he needs to be given the time, but none of it's his fault, right? He disagreed with, he didn't, he made some comments that while they were somewhat, I don't remember the exact, wording and stuff, but, the comments he made about, like, the free agent signings of, like, CJ Mosley and Le'Veon Bell. He said something along the lines of, like, they're good players and blah, 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 did, like, the PC shit, but, he inferred that, it's not how he would do things, right? And he proved that in Miami. He made efforts to get rid of the big bloated contracts and so on and so forth. He put an emphasis on, paying the guys in-house that you draft and the free agents that come in and prove themselves and so on and so forth. So, but those signings were done before he got there. He can't, he has no control over the internal organization issues that initially got Todd Bowles fired, that eventually got the GM fired mid-season, right? He can't control a lot of the does he have some say in personnel stuff? Yeah. So was he, potentially in the room and during the discussions and stuff during the Leonard Williams trade? Yeah, I would say that he's got some responsibility there as the coach at the time. But ultimately that probably wasn't his decision. And then, the Jamal Adams thing, his frustrations with the Jets was prior to Adam Gase getting here, right? And so, a lot of his frustrations were directed at, like, the ownership and the GM and the power structure. The GM ended up getting fired, right? So, like, none of that stuff is Adam Gase's fault. The myriad injuries that they had a ton of injuries. They've had tons of injuries, right? Their offensive line is garbage. He hasn't had any time yet at all. It's his first year to instill his culture and get his players and so on and so forth, right? And then people, of course, will argue that with Brian Flores, but I argue the opposite, because they literally stripped almost everybody from the previous team and brought in only guys that they chose. that's Brian Flores and Chris Greer in this front office. They made those personnel decisions together. Also, they have instilled their culture. This year, it's to be as bad as they possibly can be because the philosophy was set down by Stephen Ross to go for the number 1 pick. But you know, again, so let's get back on track though a little bit. So definitely the best thing that came out of this game is that we won. I wanted to win. Hopefully we can maybe squeak one out against the Jets later on when we play them in their stadium. Maybe against the Bengals. I do not want to have that bad of a season. I do not want to go 1-15. You know, I still think that there is certainly a high probability of that. You know, we'll lose to the Eagles, to the Colts, to the Bills, to the Patriots. You know, we could maybe beat the Jets again. We could maybe beat the Bengals. The Giants, I think they'll probably end up coming away with the win. You know, so I mean, there is some potential, but at the same time, I mean, Stephen Ross wants that number 1 pick. I don't care what kind of, you know, congratulatory fucking speech he gave to the locker room. I saw he gave some little thing. He gave Brian Flores the game ball, blah, 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 which is ridiculous because the players deserve the game ball, not Brian Flores. He gave Brian Flores the game ball. You know why? Because in this game, once again, Brian Flores made decisions, him and his coaching staff made decisions that made it difficult on this team and that put this team in position to lose. But the players refused. They had an on-field mutiny and said, no, we are not going to do that. Let's also note, though, that with our win, the Steelers win, and the Texans win today, all of our draft picks do take a hit. So our standing in our 3 first-round picks, our standing in this upcoming draft takes a hit. Okay? Which, again, I personally don't care about. I wanted to win. And it's, again, from my perspective and my philosophy is not where you draft, but how you draft. And again, I don't really have confidence for them to handle that right, evaluate properly, prioritize properly, blah, blah, blah. You know, look, man, we got the win. And also, hopefully, we potentially you know, with this kind of performance, can hopefully avoid, you know, being the worst team to ever exist. You know, so that would be lovely as well. And hopefully tonight the Patriots play the Ravens in Baltimore. Hopefully they can serve them up a loss so we can stop worrying about the Patriots going undefeated and potentially winning the Super Bowl and becoming the second team in NFL history to go undefeated and win the Super Bowl. That would be an absolute disaster. So let's hope that the Ravens manage to get a victory tonight. That would be great. But anyway, so there, like I said, there were some good things, and obviously, like Preston Williams, Mark Walton are some bright spots. Our rushing game didn't do very well tonight, but Preston Williams definitely did good. Devontae Parker did well. Gesicki did really well. Preston Williams unfortunately got hurt. But yeah, so anyway, again, so to me though, getting back to the point I was making before, the 3 things that won us this game were that we played a bad team. That definitely shot themselves in the foot, but also there was a bunch of bad officiating in this game, a ton of it. Some on both sides of the ball, some against us, some against them, but certainly I think it hurt them more in the grand scheme of things. It killed one of their drives. It helped one of our drives stay alive and move down the field for points, right? And then ultimately, though, the thing that elevated us was the players and why they deserved the game ball, not Brian Flores, because they fought and they said, no, we're gonna have a on the field mutiny, and the best way we can do that to subvert this tanking is to win. And so they took advantage of a bad team that had massive injuries across their roster and that has turmoil going on within their organization and who was getting victimized by the officiating, and also shot themselves in the foot on multiple occasions, right? The players took advantage of that and came away with the W. Stephen Ross gave Brian Flores because there were plenty of examples in this game in which he tried to, lose this game, but he was just unsuccessful. And so now though, since the players did elevate them to a victory against a bad reeling team and so on and so forth, he can at least have the facade of being like, oh, see, he tried to win, even though there is direct examples in not just the previous 3 games, but this game as well. So, before I get into all that and the more on the game analysis, though, real quick, let me go ahead and give you the injury report going into this game. The Dolphins likely will be without safety Rashad Jones and center Daniel Kilgore when they face the Jets on Sunday. Both of those players did not play. They were listed as doubtful when the Dolphins released their final injury report of the week. Kilgore with a knee, limited in practice all week. Jones with a chest, practiced on a limited basis, past 2 days after sitting out Wednesday. The only player ruled out by the Dolphins was cornerback Ken Webster. Obviously, he was one of the inactives. Sustained an ankle injury in the game against Pittsburgh. Dolphins listed 4 players as questionable. Defensive back Walt Aikens with a hip, cornerback Ryan Lewis with a knee, defensive end Avery Moss with an ankle, and tackle Jamarcus Webb with a quad. Aikens and Moss were limited in practice all week. Lewis was added to the injury report Friday, but was listed as a full participant, and Webb was limited in practice Friday after being added to the injury report Thursday as a full participant. Linebacker Vince Beagle, guard tackle Jesse Davis, cornerback Chris Lamons, safety Bobby McCain, cornerback Nick Needham, defensive tackle Robert Kimdichie, and wide receiver Albert Wilson all received no game status designation after being on the injury report this week. That means all of them will be available, and they were. The Jets had a long list of players on their injury report, including 5 who were ruled out. Wide receiver Josh Bellamy with a foot shoulder, cornerback Tremaine Johnson with ankles, apparently both of them, offensive line Ryan Khalil with a knee elbow, safety Rontez Miles with a neck and hip, and linebacker CJ Mosley with a groin. Let's also note, though, that they did lose players in this game. The center that they had starting, and in fact, we got a safety on them, not because of our defense, but because there was, after their safety had to get subbed out, or their center, the new center just snapped the ball when Darnold wasn't even looking, and it went straight into the back of the end zone. Taco Charlton almost got it for a touchdown, but it ended up going out of the back of the end zone and became a safety. But that wasn't on our defense. In fact, their offense did actually move pretty well on our defense for a good bit of the game, most notably at the beginning. But they did take some significant injuries throughout this game as well. Even though they were already massively banged up. So that's important context going into this and how it ended up playing out the way it did. Former Dolphins linebacker Neville Hewitt with a neck and knee was listed as doubtful, and the Jets listed 5 more players as questionable. Offensive line Kelvin Beachum with an ankle, wide receiver Braxton Berrios with a hamstring, tight end Chris Herndon with a hamstring, defensive line Steve McClendon with a hamstring, and wide receiver Demaryius Thomas with a hamstring ankle. So as you can see, they were massively banged up. Adam Gase can't do anything about that. That's just how it is, right? Real quick, though, let me go ahead and give you the inactives for us. Rashad Jones was inactive, Ken Webster, and Daniel Kilgore, as we knew. Myles Gaskin was also inactive, Isaiah Prince, and Avery Moss. They were inactive. But there was an inactive on here that was really odd, super odd. I just gave you the injury report and everything, right? But we had starting right guard Shaq Calhoun inactive. Now, at the end of the day, did it make that big of a difference? No, but it's weird. Why? Because he wasn't, Jamarcus Webb, the starting left tackle, was on the, popped up on the injury report, but our starting right guard, Shaq Calhoun, was never on the injury report. So why? Right? Now you could say maybe they wanted to slide Jesse Davis over and try somebody else. But Jesse Davis was at right tackle. Chris Reed went in at right guard. Why would you just decide to for no reason, no injury related reason, no discernible reason, just bench your starting right guard. And he was one of your best offensive linemen to this point. And Chris Reed had some penalties and stuff in this game, in fact. So why would you do that? So that's one of the massively questionable things that happened even before this game started. And that's on the coaching staff, right? So to me, that signals just another piece of evidence to throw on top of the pile of they tried to make it so that way we weren't going to win this game. They inserted yet another just random offensive lineman who hasn't really had playing time and who struggled in this game a bit, right? When you're with over one of your better offensive linemen to this point, you mess up the chemistry and the continuity. Why would you do that? He's not injured. There's no reason for it, right? So there's that. But anyway, so that was super questionable. I wondered why that was the case. Oh my goodness. Sorry about that. Anyway, so that's part of the evidence as to why the coaching staff should not be given, credit for this, right? But there's more, including, bad use of penalties and play calling and so on and so forth. There's other things, but we'll get to that as we go. Anyway, so, real quick, where was I? Okay, so let's get into it though, and let's start getting into, the statistics and some more of the deep dive into the analysis. So at the end of the game, like I said, most importantly to me though is we got the win. So we are now 1-7. We are not going to go 0-16. There is still potential that we could go 1-15. I hope not, and there's definitely some opportunities going forward. But we won this game against the Jets. Again, they had massive issues, injury issues going into this game. Got more injured during the game. They actually started out well. They scored on their first drive. They were moving the ball around on us, not too bad. But again, bad officiating killed them a lot. And then our players just took advantage, right? And I mean, this team has just massive issues from top down, but most of which, again, should not be blamed on Adam Gase because, he didn't like, the big free agent signings. He, would do things a different way, right? Like, so, and he just inherited a lot of the bullshit, right? None of it was his fault. He didn't create the problems within their organization. He just inherited that. So, whereas Brian Flores and our front office is the exact opposite. Everything they've done is, the results we've gotten is directly attributed to the decisions that they've made from top down in ours. And again, the culture is set. I mean, clearly, they made it so that way we were going to be as bad as possible to compete for the number 1 pick. And, they just got rid of everybody. Absolutely fucking everybody, pretty much, right? And they cleared almost the entire roster and then brought only guys that they picked. So this entire roster is their guys, right? It's not like, because when Adam Gase came in here, right, he didn't have a fire sale. He didn't eject everybody. So most of those players were from the previous regime. Now, let's also note, though, that Adam Gase and the regime during his time drafted really well. Players like Laramie Tunsil and Minka Fitzpatrick and Kenyon Drake and so on and so forth, right? And Vincent Taylor, who now plays for the Bills, though, but who did really good things for us. No reason why we cut him, but we did for some strange reason, right? Mike Gesicki, who's playing well now, was an Adam Gase pick, right? So they drafted well, and they were getting things going in the right. Not only that, but they brought in good, smart free agents that were cheaper, that had proven track records, like Sitton and Kilgore. And I do like Kilgore, right? I've said I've been an advocate of his for sure, but he can't, prop up the entire offensive line. but then they also brought in guys, you know, like Kiko Alonso, which I thought was great and did wonderful things for us. Anyway, so they were building it right. They were trying to, you know, and Kenny Stills, right? They were trying to, they extended him, gave him a contract because they wanted to pay guys in-house, proven guys, like if you're a free agent and you come in, you prove yourself, we're going to pay you. If we drafted you and you prove yourself, we're going to pay you in-house. We're not going to massively spend. They were ejecting all of the bad, bloated contracts, right? Anyway, so two different situations, but with similar results is kind of, I guess, part of what I'm getting at there. Anyway, so continuing on though, so we did win 26-18. Again, I think that was attributed to the fact that the Jets are bad and massively beat up. They shot themselves in the foot and were victimized by terrible officiating, and the players, the Dolphins players, rose to the occasion and said, no, we are not going to lay down. We are not going to accept a tank, and we are going to fight. And they've proven that all season. It's not their fault that they've been stripped of talent and leadership and proven production and all that stuff. They've been going hard at it. That's why the argument that it's the players' fault and they just need to execute better is ridiculous. They're young, but then in the same breath, they will defend Brian Flores and this regime by saying, oh, but they have such a young and inexperienced team. But it was their decision to make the team young and inexperienced. So it's not the players' fault, and they've been proving the entire time that they've been fighting. But there is substantial evidence. Now, the first 4 games, we weren't even close to competitive. Although there were in those games, there were some instances of just weird, odd, random, questionable decisions. But we weren't even close to competitive, so it didn't matter. But the past 4 games and the 3 games that we lost most recently, those games came down to coaching and decisions by the coaching staff that lost us the game. The 2-point conversion, and again, everybody wants to praise him for being such a aggressive guy, but almost every single one of his aggressive decisions have come back to be a massive disaster. Most notably, one of the most notable is the 3rd and 20 play in the Pittsburgh game. But then with 17 seconds left on the clock, he decides to just kneel it and not even go for anything whatsoever. Okay. And in this game, we'll get to this a little bit more in a minute, but his challenge on a pass interference call. Now, I agreed with the challenge. I thought that was the right kind of aggressive, but then, you know, immediately afterward, although I thought there is an argument to be made that it actually probably wasn't the most strategic thing, but we'll get into that in a minute. But then, you know, he showed an instance in which he should have been aggressive, that he wasn't aggressive, and for what? Why? So my point is he hasn't been smart about how he's been aggressive, and in the vast majority of cases, it's backfired. Now, the challenge on that pass interference, it actually could have ended up biting them in the butt if they needed the time, because he lost that challenge, and if we needed that timeout down the stretch, it could have ended up biting us in the butt. But the players refused, and they fought their asses off and made sure that wasn't the case. But it could have. So, but it's the outlier. It's the one example where it didn't. But the exception proves the rule more than anything, right? So anyway, let's get into this though. So let's get some stats. Again, we won 26-18. We're now both 1-7. We had 316 total yards. They had 321. We had 266 passing yards. They had 238. We only had 50 rushing yards. So again, our rushing game wasn't all that great. They had 83 rushing yards. We were 4.9 yards per play. They were 5.1. So again, their offense actually was moving on us quite a bit. They were 5.1 yards per play. They didn't crack 100 rushing yards, but they did get 83, more than our 50. And they had 238 passing yards. Sam Darnold actually had a decent stat line overall. His one interception was just stupid. He shouldn't have thrown it, but it is what it is. But they were 5.1 yards per play, only 35% on third down conversions. We were 50%. We did win the turnover battle, so obviously that helped because they had the one interception, and we didn't throw any picks or anything like that. But their defense actually though was all over the place as well. So their defense actually performed pretty well overall. And so that's why, like, when you take into full context, their offense certainly in spurts was moving over our defense, especially at the beginning. They got a touchdown on their first drive. We went 3 and out on our first drive, what have you. And then also when you look at like their defensive statistics and so on and so forth, mixed in with the bad officiating that hurt them far more than it hurt us. And then, the context of also, they are just not a good team and, have just injuries everywhere, more than we do. And we got a ton of fucking injuries, right? So there's all of that. But my point is when you have the full context, right? It puts our victory into a little bit more context, right? This could have been a loss, and again, and I barely started touching on it, but there is proof and evidence that the coaching staff attempted to make it as difficult on us as possible. But real quick too, we had the ball for 31 minutes and 14 seconds. They had it for 28 minutes and 46 seconds. We had 6 penalties. They had 10. So obviously they had more penalties overall, blah, blah, blah. Let's talk about the bad officiating real quick. So to be fair though, early in the game, there was a roughing the passer penalty on Christian Wilkins. It was on their first drive. Although, to be fair and clear, it wouldn't have mattered anyway because the play ended up in their touchdown, in their first touchdown of the game, right? Their touchdown on their first drive. So, but it was a bad call. They threw the flag. It was a bad call. It got declined because the result of the play was a touchdown. So that was not one of the 6 penalties that we had that I just mentioned. We had 6 accepted penalties in this game. If that one would have been accepted, it would be 7, and it would have been whatever, half the distance to the goal, fresh set of downs, what have you, and they likely could have still punched it in the end zone. But when you already have a touchdown on the board, why would you accept that penalty? So it got declined. It didn't matter in the long run, but to be completely fair, it was a totally bad call because all Christian Wilkins did was literally just pushed Sam Darnold. That was it. Super fucking weak. Okay, so totally bad call. To be completely fair, because I am objective. I've been very consistent about all of this from the very beginning. I've consistently said that I do not want to go 0-16 and that I hope they prove me wrong and don't go 0-16. And the players proved me wrong. So thank you to them. They should have got the game ball, not fucking sell out Brian Flores. Anyway, and so there's that. But there were a couple massive bullshit calls on them that really affected drives, that killed one of their drives and that extended one of our drives that gave us some points. Now again, some credit is due to the Dolphins players who rose to the occasion and took advantage of a team that's not very good and who's really beat up and who was getting victimized by the officiating. They took advantage of that, so credit to them. But we were able to do that in part because of how they were getting victimized. Now, as an example, there was an offensive pass interference on Anderson, okay, Robbie Anderson, right, that killed their drive. This is the penalty that I'm referring to that killed a Jets drive. I believe it was their second drive. So they scored a touchdown on their first drive, and then we go 3 and out on our second drive, or on our first drive, okay? And then the next drive, so this is huge because it changes momentum and the course of the game, right? So then their second drive, they end up having I believe it was their second drive. They have it was like either the second or third, but I'm pretty sure it was their second drive. They had an offensive pass interference call on Robbie Anderson that was just a bullshit call, because all he did was push the defensive back. The defensive back ended up on his ass. Okay, whatever, but that's not anything to me, because why? I mean, he just didn't plant his feet. But that's all he did. He didn't like drive him into the ground or slam him, and he like stopped moving forward. But the thing is, he was a blocker, so that's what he's supposed to be doing on that play. Robbie Anderson was a designated blocker in that play. And also it was within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. You're allowed to, both players, the defensive and offensive players, within 5 yards are allowed to put hands on each other, right? So he was a blocker anyway. He put his hands on the dude. It was a bullshit, and it wiped out a decent play as well. So they were moving the ball on our defense. Like I said, they were doing all right at that throughout the game. They had the momentum. They were up 7-0, and they stopped us on our first drive. That killed their drive. We did end up getting a stop or whatever at the end of the day, but at that point, their bad offensive line and so on and so forth, whatever, wasn't able to overcome that kind of, deficit. Because it was like, at that point, it ended up being like 2nd and 18 or something like that. 2nd and long became 3rd and long, became punt, right? And then on our next drive, we ended up scoring points. Our very next drive, there was an unnecessary roughness penalty on no wait, was it was yeah, it was an unnecessary roughness penalty because Ryan Fitzpatrick, I don't recall if it was like play action pass or a designed run, but Ryan Fitzpatrick ends up running for it, and he slides down, gave himself up. He had like 4 defenders on him, and one of them, in the momentum of the play, goes over top of him, but landed on Ryan Fitzpatrick. And it's the stupidest fucking rule, and I hate it, and it's a bullshit fucking rule that the NFL put in just to favor quarterbacks so that way they can provide offenses with more opportunities to do shit. But anyway, so on that play, it was a decent pickup by Ryan Fitzpatrick, but then they gave us, they continued the drive, and gave us a fresh set of downs, and because I think it might have even been like on 3rd down or whatever that we ran that play. Anyway, point is though, it gave us a chunk of yardage and fresh set of downs that ultimately led into points, but it was a total bullshit call. There was no way the defender could avoid from landing on Ryan Fitzpatrick. And I've been bitching about that for quite some time, since going back to last year when it got one of our defensive ends injured because William Hayes tore his ACL trying to abide by that stupid fucking rule. So it's a garbage rule then, it's a garbage rule now, and so again, to be perfectly fair and objective, it was a bullshit call, but it helped us out in that drive and we ended up getting points. And so the momentum started shifting. Their drive ended up stalling and then going nowhere, and then ours ended up netting points on that next drive after having gone 3 and out on our first drive. So you see what I'm saying? So but again, credit to the Dolphins players for taking advantage of that. But that was a key contributing factor to why we won, right? And so yeah. Anyway, so but moving on though, let's actually I don't know how. Let me give you some more stats real quick. I know I'm like super all over the place right now, so forgive me, and I hope you guys can, you know, maintain the full context. It's a lot of stuff to talk about, but let me give you some more stats. Ryan Fitzpatrick had a good game. Again, the players played really well and did their part. He was 24 for 36, 66.7% completion percentage, 288 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a 118.8 passer rating. Sam Darnold was okay, right? Despite their woes and their troubles, the injuries and so on and so forth, and the officiating that was overwhelmingly against them, blah, blah, blah. Sam Darnold was 27 for 39, 69.2% completion percentage, 260 yards, a touchdown, and an interception with an 85.4 passer rating. Mark Walton led the way for us in rushing, 10 rushes, 29 yards, and a 2.4 average. Kalen Ballage had 7 rushes for 19 yards and a 2.7 average. Le'Veon Bell led the way for them, 17 rushes, 66 yards, and a 3.9 average. Bilal Powell had 2 rushes for 16 yards and an 8 average. All right, so let me get more, because I know everybody's like super eager though to hear more of the examples of why the coaching staff tried to. So I talked about Shaq Calhoun. Why would you just mysteriously take one of your best linemen out when he's not on an injury report, so on and so forth? But let's get into it. So early on in the game, there was a running into the kicker penalty, right? We were backed up deep into our own end zone. And that's where, you know, our starting field, we went to go punt the ball, right? And there was a running into the kicker penalty, right? Now, initially I thought, and then they declined the penalty. Now, initially I was like, well, why wouldn't you have that? Because it ended up being, Matt Hawk was, you know, in our own end zone. It ended up being like a 60-yard punt, a really good punt. And I thought that the penalty 5 yards would be added to the end, but I was mistaken in that. That's not how it would be applied. It would be applied to where we were, right? And at the time it was like 4th and 7, I think it was. So the 5 yards would not have given us a first down. And so that's the reasoning why Brian Flores didn't decline the penalty, but we were on like the 1 fucking yard line or the 2 yard line or whatever. Matt Hawk was in our own end zone. No, it's risky. It's super risky. He should have accepted the penalty, given, it doesn't matter about the first down. Give him 5 yards of breathing room. Now, again, did it end up in that particular instance? Did that particular thing go bad for us? No, it didn't. But why would you take that risk? Right? It's unnecessary. Accept the penalty, give him 5 yards. So that was questionable. In the second quarter, at 12, there was 12 minutes and 23 seconds left in the second quarter. So just a few minutes had come off the clock into the second quarter. There was a 3rd and 27. The Jets were on offense. They had a 3rd and 27 play. Okay. And now again, in the grand scheme of things, did it end up, did that particular thing end up costing, did this particular thing end up having, you know, an overwhelming major impact? Probably not. But there was a 3rd and 27, but it just goes back to the horrible, gross misuse of timeouts that Brian Flores has exhibited, the trend he's exhibited. He called a timeout. It was 3rd and 27. Why? It's not, like I said, there was 12 minutes and 23 seconds left in the half. It's not like you needed to save timeout to, you know, maybe try and get one in before the half or whatever. You know, I think at this point we were actually probably up in the game. I'd have to check to see, but I think we actually might have been up. It was a 3rd and 27, right? Clearly they were starting to suffer from the penalties and the officiating and mistakes and so on and so forth. Why would you call a timeout? I mean, again, did it have a major impact? Probably not. But why would you do it? What is the philosophy behind it? The only thing that could be accomplished is you give them time to like regroup, and again, that was part of the problem with the 3rd and 20 play against the Steelers. They took a timeout right before that play. They were getting ready to come up to the line of scrimmage. Their play call changed. Our play call changed, right? Going into that, they went from whatever defensive play call they were gonna run, called the timeout, gave them a time to breathe and figure out what they wanted to run, and then they decided to call the bullshit 8-man blitz and drop 3 guys all the way back to the goal line 45 yards out, right? Blah, 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 blah. So he's got so many examples of terrible uses of timeouts. And there was another one in this example as well, right? Now, again, that one was less egregious because it probably affected the game less, but there was a timeout used in the second, let's see, or at the end of the second quarter that was totally bullshit. That was a lot, potentially had a much greater impact, and really it should have ended up having a much greater impact, but the Jets got once again victimized. I'll get to that in a minute. But then in the second half, that challenge that he did, which I did agree with being aggressive there and challenging the call, because I didn't agree with the call initially on the field, but because the call on the field was pass interference, and anyway, we'll get to that in a minute. It was on Parker. It was offensive pass interference on Parker. I disagreed with the call on the field. I agreed with Brian Flores' decision to be aggressive and go for it. However, at the same time, you could easily argue that it wasn't smart because it did cost us a timeout. He lost that challenge. We had to deal with the penalty anyway, and then which made it like 2nd and 18. And then we lost the timeout, which was our second of the half. So we were down to just 1 at that point. And if at some point now, again, the Jets are massively injured. They're not very good. They were struggling, being victimized by the penalties and the mistakes. So it wasn't likely, but if they if they were able to come back and take the lead and we needed that timeout, that decision, that aggressive decision, would have been again on the pile of ones that backfired or could have potentially backfired and blown up in his face. In this instance, it didn't, and he was lucky for that, but that's all it was. Anyway, but let me continue on though. So let's see. So let me give you some more stats though. In the receiving game, Mike Gesicki, like I said, led the way for us in Adam Gase pick. He was 6 for 6, 95 yards. But he is coming along. And so that's good. But that's, what you would expect at this point in his progression. Because he's now in year 3? I believe. Anyway, but I'm very happy to see him developing. Preston Williams, again, though, he got injured. It's a knee injury. He ended up getting carted off the field. He did walk off the field under his own power, but then they ended up carting him off later. He could end up missing time, substantial time, which would suck. But he was 5 of 9 for 72 yards and 2 touchdowns. Devontae Parker was 4 of 6, 57 yards and a score, and his touchdown was brilliant. It was beautiful. So massive credit to him. Jakeem Grant was 3 of 5 for 33 yards. Alan Hearns 2 of 3 for 16. Mark Walton 3 of 4 for 12. Jamison Crowder led the way for them, 8 of 9 for 83 yards and a touchdown. Le'Veon Bell was 8 of 9 for 55 yards. Ryan Griffin 6 of 8 for 50. Robbie Anderson 2 of 4 for 33. Vincent Smith 1 of 3 for 20, and Demaryius Thomas 2 of 3 for 19. Okay, so real quick, let's get back to the end of the second quarter and back to the questionable decisions by the coaching staff, right? So at the very end of the second quarter, first and foremost, at the end of the second quarter, we were winning 21-7. Okay, 21-7. We've got a good, comfortable lead at this point. At the end of the second quarter, with about a minute and a half left to go, right? We end up, we get a touchdown that brings our lead to 21-7, and then we kick the ball off okay? And on the next kickoff, they returned the ball 78 yards. They had a 78-yard return, so got great field position because of some missed tackles on the ensuing kickoff coverage. So, you know, that's a hit to the players, right? They missed some key tackles that allowed him to spring for 78 yards. But then immediately after that, I think it was first down, they ran the ball. They got like 2 yards, so it ended up being like second and 8 or whatever. And it was about 1:30 left to go. The 2-minute warning was already done. The Jets didn't have any timeouts, okay? And Brian Flores calls a timeout. Why? You're up 21-7. It's not like you need to preserve, and you get the ball back after half. Okay, so it's not like you need to preserve any kind of clock for yourself to try and maybe squeak one out before the half ends or whatever. You're leading 21-7. You're going to go into the half with a fucking, you know, substantial lead. Why would you call the timeout? Give them time to breathe, figure out their play call, get situated, so on and so forth. Why would you do that? Why would you save clock time for them and potentially give them more opportunities? And again, this actually should have turned out worse than it ended up turning out, right? Because what ended up happening after that, not only did they call the timeout and give them more opportunities, but then the very next play, I don't know if it was a receiver or a tight end. I don't remember who it was. I think it might have been a tight end. But anyway, they got a fucking touchdown, okay? The receiver, it was kind of towards the back of the end zone. He catches the ball. He got the one foot down and then drug the other foot while still maintaining possession. And then as he's going to the ground to brace himself or whatever, the ball does shift a little bit, but he already had full control of the ball. Both feet were down, right? And he just fell out of the back of the end zone, and the ball shifted a little bit as he was falling out of the back of the end zone and as he hit the ground. Now, again, I like it from the perspective of it did help us win this game, but I am objective, I am fair, and it was a bullshit call. It was a total bullshit call because they ended up reversing it. At that point, it was 21-13 pending the extra point to make it 21-14. They would have cut their lead. So that right there also would have changed, you know, the momentum and stuff in the game, right? So not only the second Jets drive that got stalled and stunted because of bad officiating, not only the second Dolphins drive that got aided by bad officiating, but then they got a touchdown robbed from them because bad officiating. But to be fair to the officials, it's in large part because the catch rule is so like specific and convoluted and hard to read and understand. I mean, we've been having this debate for years, but it was bullshit. It took it away. And then on the I think it was the next play. It might have been 2 plays later. But then the very next play, Sam Darnold made a massive mistake and he should have taken the sack. He was under pressure, so good on the Dolphins defense there and whatever. But it was still only like second down. They still had a few more opportunities to go. Sam Darnold should have just taken the sack, but he tried to throw it away. That's what he was attempting to do. But he had a dude draped all over him, and it just kind of like floated up in the air. And again, to Sam Darnold's defense, his receiver didn't try all that hard to get it. But in his receiver's defense, there were like 3 or 4 Dolphins around him. Part of the reason why Darnold shouldn't have thrown it. But Jamal Wiltz got the interception and made the play on the ball. So good on him, credit on him. But that Jets drive should have ended in a touchdown. The half we should have gone into the half 21-14 at least. Possibly even different. You know, it might have even been maybe the Jets, if they didn't get fucked on their second drive, maybe they would have scored. Maybe it would have been, 14-0 at that point or 10-0 at that point. And if we didn't get helped out in our second drive, after going 3 and out in our first drive, maybe we wouldn't have had as many points. And then if that touchdown didn't get wiped out, it certainly would have been closer. I mean, with the final score, if they would have had that touchdown, based off of the final score right now, add 7 points, they would have been 25-26. So the game would have been 25-26. Now, obviously, if that play was different and other plays would have been different, blah, blah, blah. But, I mean, the Jets got, they're not a very good team with a lot of turmoil going on, and they're massively banged up going into this game. But then they got massively fucked over by the officiating. They got, the officiating was in our favor overwhelmingly in this game. And then, but then again, credit to the Dolphins players who took advantage of that, right? Anyway, so let's see. And then, why would you call that timeout, right? Give them that opportunity. They should have had the touchdown, but so he got off the hook. So Brian Flores, right? And nobody's going to talk about, none of these other people are going to talk about the misuse of timeouts, the mysterious reason one of your best offensive linemen and starting right guard wasn't in the game. Nobody's going to say, well, why did you use the timeout right there with 1 minute and 30 seconds left with the clock running? Again, it was a running play, so the clock was ticking away. Why would you preserve clock for them? They didn't have timeouts. They were down by 2 touchdowns, and that drive should have netted a touchdown. But he got super lucky by, bullshit fucking NFL rules. So, all that stuff's going to get overlooked, and he's going to be made to be this fucking massive hero, even though there is substantial evidence to show that he really, really, really fucking tried to do what he could, and the players on the field were just like, nah, we ain't fucking having it, brother. That shit is not going down like that. We are gonna spoil the fuck out of this for you. Anyway, so let's get into this a little bit more with some more statistics. Jonathan Harrison had a fumble for them, but it wasn't lost. Again, the only turnover in the game was that one Sam Darnold interception. Defensively, Nick Needham led the way for us. He was 6 solo tackles, 3 assisted with a sack and a tackle for loss. And again, though, our defense actually did have some pretty solid statistics overall, but so did their defense. Our defense had okay statistics overall. Their defense had some solid statistics. I'll give you, but let me continue. So Jamal Wiltz had 5 solo tackles, 3 assisted, with that 1 interception and a pass defense. Jerome Baker had 5 solo, 2 assisted tackles with a pass defense. Christian Wilkins had 3 solo tackles, 2 assisted, 1 sack, 2 tackles for loss. Eric Rowe had 3 solo tackles, 1 assisted. Devon Godshaw, 2 solo, 3 assisted, a sack and a tackle for loss. He finally had his first sack, but full context there, the Jets offensive line didn't block him at all. Or no, I'm sorry. They did. They had him blocked, and then for some reason just gave up on the block. They just stopped blocking him, and then he had a clean shot right at Darnold. But good on him for continuing on with the play, of course. You keep pushing. Obviously, the Jets offensive line didn't, so that's why he got the sack. But that is his first one. He has been kind of disappointing to this point, so let's, but it is just his rookie season, and he has obviously all this other shit going on around him. Charles Harris had 1 solo tackle, 2 assisted, and a tackle for loss. Now, defensive statistics, overall, we had the 1 interception and 2 passes defensed, and we had 3 sacks and 5 tackles for loss. So decent statistics there. Yeah, so decent statistics there defensively, right? So again, the players certainly played their heart out and did everything that they possibly could, and they are certainly one of the major reasons why we got this win. But the coaching staff, on the other hand, had multiple examples of situations in which they, tried to give them opportunities, tried to help out the Jets, and so on and so forth. But let's see. Brandon Copeland led the way for them. Solo tackles, 1 assisted with a sack and 2 tackles for loss. Nate Hairston, 6 solo tackles, Brian Poole, who got injured, 4 solo tackles, 1 assisted. James Burgess, 4 solo, 2 assisted with a tackle for loss. Jamal Adams, 4 solo with a sack and 2 tackles for loss. Marcus May, 3 solo, 2 assisted. Darryl Roberts, 3 solo with 2 passes defensed. Henry Anderson, 3 solo with a tackle for loss. Quinnen Williams, 2 solo, 1 assisted, 1 sack, 1 tackle for loss. Stephen McClendon, 1 solo tackle and a tackle for loss. Jordan Jenkins, 1 solo, 1 sack, 1 tackle for loss. Folorunso Fatukasi, I'm sorry, I'm butchering that name terribly, but he had 1 solo tackle and a pass defense. And Terrell Basham had 1 assisted tackle and 2 passes defense. So they had, defensively, they actually had pretty good statistics, right? So they had 5 passes defensed. They had 4 sacks and 9 tackles for loss. So they did, solid. So their defense was actually doing some good things, but that just go and again, they had, 43 solo tackles, 9 assisted, and let's see, we had 32 solo tackles. So substantially less solo tackles, but substantially higher assisted tackles, which means that our front 7, our D-line, and our linebackers are not doing as the front 7 are not doing enough. But then the back 7 with their assisted tackles, 29 assisted tackles, were wrapping things up. The linebackers and the secondary were wrapping things up. And so the defensive line and linebackers, the front 7 needed to be better, but the back 7 was cleaning things up. Yeah, so again, the players played fucking hard, man. Let's see, in the kicking game, Jason Sanders was 1 of 2, so he missed a field goal. He's been really inconsistent all season. Long of 26, 3 of 3 on his extra points, though. Sam Ficken was 3 of 4 on his field goal, so obviously that hurt them as well. They missed one of their field goals. Long of 52, 1 of 1 on extra points. Matt Hawk had 4 punts with a 41.5 average, 3 inside the 20 with a long of 57. Matt Hawk had a good day. Lachlan Edwards had 4 punts with a 44 average, 1 inside the 20 with a long of 48. Jakeem Grant had 3 kickoff returns with a 12 average, a long of 22. Durham Smythe had 1 return for 14 yards. Braxton Berrios had 1 return for 25 yards. Vincent Smith had 1 return for 78 yards. So in that way, our coverage, our kickoff coverage definitely could have been a lot better. Punt returns, Preston Williams had 2, 9.5 average, a long of 10, and they didn't have any. And so real quick though too, let me get a little bit more into, some of the decisions by the coaching staff. And some of the officiating. So let's get back to officiating real quick, which does tie into some coaching staff decision stuff. So there was a pass interference on Devontae Parker, right? Now, this one, so it sucked because it negated like a 28-yard play to Parker. Parker made the reception, broke a tackle, whatever, got downfield for 28 yards. So it hampered one of our drives later in the game. We were obviously already ahead and so on and so forth. And, all the momentum at that point was going in our direction. So it didn't end up even mattering. So that one, so the two calls that were bad against us didn't even really matter in the grand scheme of things. Again, the one on Christian Wilkins, it was definitely a bad call, but it didn't matter because the play on the field was a Jets touchdown, and the only penalty that would reverse that would be a Jets penalty, not a Dolphins penalty, and that's why the penalty ended up being declined. Now this one on Parker, it didn't even really end up mattering because again, at that point the game was pretty in hand. It was later on towards the very end of the game. But it did suck because it did wipe out a 28-yard gain. but then it was a pass interference. Now let's look at it. So the thing about this one, it was right on the edge. Let's juxtapose it to a couple different pass interferences that we've seen recently. First, the Robbie Anderson one, that was a total bullshit, where all he did was push the Dolphins defender when he was a blocker in that blocking scheme. The receiver had the ball and he was blocking for the receiver, okay? And it was within 5 yards, okay? So it should not have been a pass interference whatsoever. Absolutely should not have been a pass interference. But in this case, Devontae Parker's pass interference, offensive pass interference that ended up hurting us, was like right on the edge of 5 yards. So it was borderline. So, but that one's tough. So that one makes the call difficult. But also, when you looked at the replay, now I disagreed with the call on the field because of the fact that it was just football, man. So they, the defender kind of ran into Parker a little bit, but it was right on the edge of 5 yards. That's why, like, defensive pass interference probably wouldn't be a good call, or would make that a difficult call. But the defender kind of, they collided into each other. There was a little bit of hand fighting, but then when you watch the replay, they're actually, and this is part of the actual rule for pass interference, especially with offensive pass interference, because the question was, did he push off? And they're in the replay, unfortunately, again, I thought it was just football and they shouldn't have called it at all. So I definitely disagreed with the call on the field. But the problem was two things. One, the call on the field was pass interference. So one, you have to have definitive proof that it wasn't to overturn it. And unfortunately, on the replay, when you looked at it, Devontae Parker's arm actually did fully extend in that kind of a motion, right? In which he was like pushing off. Okay, so in that situation, he did have full extension, so the call on the field stands. They didn't confirm it because there wasn't definitive, either way. But since there wasn't definitive evidence to overturn it, they went with the call on the field, which constituted a pass interference. Now, so to the officiating, it was bad officiating. But again, the two instances in which bad officiating hurt us, it was less of a factor. It had less of a factor on the overall outcome of the game as it played out. But the two egregious bad officiating calls that affected the Jets negatively, that did have substantial effect on the outcome of the game. And that's why I say the bad officiating overall affected the Jets way more, and why it was a key factor, and why the three key factors were that the Jets are not a very good team with a lot of problems and are massively injured going into this game. And then that's the first factor. The second factor is that they did shoot themselves in the foot with, like, let's say the Sam Darnold interception and some other things along the way. But also they got massively victimized by the officiating. And then the Dolphins players, to their credit, and they are one of the biggest reasons for the ultimate victory, is they took advantage of those two other big factors. Okay. But anyway, so getting back to it. So, but bad call on the refs for the pass interference. But then the officiating was good in that the stands call was the right call to make, because it was super borderline. The call on the field was pass interference. There wasn't anywhere near enough evidence to overturn it. So the ultimate call of it standing was a good call. If they would have confirmed it, that would be, I think, a bit ridiculous. And if they would have overturned it, I think that would have been a bit ridiculous. So the middle ground call there of it standing was the right call. Initially, the call was bad. But then what happened? So then Brian Flores challenged the pass interference. And again, to be fair, I actually did agree with that call, because I thought that was, overall, I thought that was the right kind of aggressive call to make. Right? And ultimately, it did not hurt us in the long run because he did lose the call, right? Again, because the call stood as it was called on the field. So he did lose the call. He did lose the challenge, which means he lost a timeout. At that point, we only had 2 timeouts. So after that, we were down to 1. At that point, there was also still like, you know, I don't know. There was still at least like 10 or 12 minutes to go in the final quarter, but it might have even been, I think it actually might have been at the very end of the third quarter. Point is, though, there was still a decent amount of time left, right? We already, you know, we had the lead and so on and so forth. And so it didn't end up coming to bite us in the butt. But at the point they were down, at that point they were down by like 7 points. Okay. And so if, you know, if they would have scored and, you know, gotten the lead down to like 2 points or whatever, and then eventually if they could have managed to take the lead, and then down the stretch, if we would have needed that timeout to mount, you know, some sort of comeback to overcome, you know, their comeback and win the game, well, then that could have seriously jeopardized us. That's why I say, again, I completely disagreed with the call on the field. I thought it was a bad call by the refs. And then I actually did agree with that aggressive approach, to be fair to Brian Flores. Again, there were massively other, there were other massively questionable and detrimental things that he decided, Shaq Calhoun being out, blah, 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 the other things, the end of the first half, so on and so forth, where they should have gotten a touchdown. But I did agree with the challenge, even though he lost it. But that timeout could have at some point come back to bite us. And so that's why that's the one example of him being aggressive in which it didn't backfire. But almost every other example backfired, and backfired in a massive way. Again, the 2-point conversion against the Redskins. The 3rd and 20 play against the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? Also, though, let's juxtapose real quick, going back to the Parker pass interference. Let's talk about the one that happened in the Steelers game really quick on the Steelers wide receiver. It was an offensive pass interference that negated a big play. But when you looked at the replay, okay, our defensive back, whoever it was, I don't remember, had really good coverage. It was like neck and neck with him. Right, the receiver just made a really good, you know, like one-handed play on the ball. They were tangled, you know, their arms were tangled. They were hand fighting. It's just football. Let it fucking play out. Okay, don't call pass interference, because there was no, on the replay, there was no full extension of the arm. There was no visible push off. None of that. So it was a bad call. It should not have been called. Okay. It's just football. Again, I thought the same thing about the Parker one. The difference there is in the Parker one, the call on the field was pass interference, and upon further review, the key is there actually was visible a full extension of the arm. Now, did he really push off? No, it didn't look like he really, you know, even pushed off all that much. But on the call on the field was pass interference, and there wasn't enough evidence to overturn it because there was a full extension of the arm. In that Pittsburgh one, that was not the case. And then that was the pass interference that ended up negating a big play that would have had them, you know, way downfield. But then it was incomplete, and we had it. We caught a break. It was 3rd and 20, and then the massive, you know, bad call on defense. Anyway, so there's plenty of examples in the previous games and in this game to show that this coaching staff is trying to lose, but the players are refusing. And it was because of them playing against a bad and battered, bruised up team that got even more injured in this game, and then also got massively victimized by terrible officiating, and the players were able to overcome. Also, one other thing, another massively questionable decision. It was in the third quarter, later on in the third quarter, if I'm not mistaken. It was 3rd and 3, And it was goal. It was goal to go. 3rd and 3, late in the third. Yeah, 3rd and 3, late in the third quarter. Okay. And we run the ball. Okay. We don't get it. And they end up taking the field goal. 3 points. Okay, I get it. You know, you might want to get, you know, the points or whatever. But that would have been a situation in which it would have been aggressive to be, and smart, and also smart to go for it on 4th down. So everybody praises Brian Flores for being so aggressive, but again, almost every single one of the situations backfired on him massively. The one situation where he was aggressive in this game could have backfired on him, but he got lucky and it didn't. He got lucky just because his players, you know, refused to acquiesce to this tank bullshit. Anyway, but then you're, you know, a few yards out. Why not go for it on 4th down? Because at worst case, they would have been pinned super deep within 5 yards of their own end zone. And your defense was playing pretty well. You definitely could have stopped them, especially with the way that they were playing, with the way that the momentum was, that we were up by 2 scores at that particular point in the game. Like, I mean, there was no reason not to it. That would have been a smart time to be aggressive, but he chose not to. And instead, he just wanted to get the 3 points, which is not a terrible decision, okay? But that would have been a situation in which going for it, you know, on 4th down would have been smart. Whereas let's look at the 4th down, attempt that Brian Flores got super pissed about in the Steelers game, that everybody wanted to defend him and be like, oh, see, that's what we want, right, from our coach. But for what? It was clearly short. But let's look at that, right? So in that position, we weren't at their goal line. We weren't in the red zone. We were, you know, just past the 50, or, you know, like somewhere right around midfield. It was 4th and 1. The design of the play in and of itself was a silly play call because it was a designed run for Ryan Fitzpatrick. You need 1 yard. It's 4th and 1. Why would you do a design run? And then he got a favorable spot. They challenged it, and it was right because it was short. And then, so, you know, you could absolutely argue that that was not a smart situation to be that aggressive in. But if you were going to be that aggressive, then why would you call the stupid play call that you did? And then when you're proven to be wrong, clearly, he was clearly short. Why are you going to throw this little, like, hissy fit tantrum? Sure, okay, whatever. You want to show your team you're fighting for them. But there are much better opportunities, like, for example, a 4th and, you know, 2 or 3 when you're up by, like, 2 scores. If you want to show a smart time to be aggressive, that would be it. And if you really want to show that you are fighting for your team to win, then go out and be aggressive and pile on the points. But he didn't do it. And then, of course, not only that, but again, in the Steelers game, after the massively failed 3rd down and 20, they had 17 seconds left to go in the game, or in the second half, or in the first half. And they just knelt the ball. 17 seconds. You could have taken a couple shots. Didn't do it. But nobody besides me wants to point that out and say, well, okay, if you're going to praise him for being aggressive, well, it's important to look at how he's being aggressive. Anyway, so, look, like I said, at the end of the day, I am massively excited that we got the win. That is honestly the most important thing to me. We're not going to go 0-16. Hopefully the Patriots lose tonight and prevent them from going 16-0. If that happens, that will be amazing. But our draft positioning definitely did get hurt because we won, because the Steelers won, and because the Texans won. So all of our 3 first-round picks took a hit from this week. Let's see. You know, But I am happy that we got the win because I don't care about that. Again, it's how you draft, not where you draft, and so on and so forth. So I'm just glad we got the win. We avoided an 0-16 season. It's still not a for sure thing that we're gonna avoid a 1-15 season, but we'll see. We'll see how things go from here. We'll see how injuries continue to affect us and so on and so forth. I mean, I think we're going to lose our next 2 games against the Colts and the Bills. We play in Indianapolis. That's going to be a really tough game. The Bills game is going to be in Miami, but they're a far better team than the Jets are. And also, Stephen Ross wants to get, that number 1 pick. But let's... Also, real quick before I end this video, let's also note that if we do end up somehow miraculously winning another game or 2, or because of this win, if we don't end up getting the number 1 overall pick, because the Bengals are now the only winless team to this point, if we don't end up getting the number 1 pick, let's see how they decide to handle it from there. Do they trade up, and how much of our draft capital do they give away to trade up however many spots they need to trade up to go get their quarterback? Now, honestly, that could be one of the worst situations for the Dolphins. If they do end up maybe beating the Jets and the Bengals and end up with 3 wins, that could be enough to get them to pick. Their pick could end up being 5 or 6 or something like that, right? Maybe still top 5, but maybe bordering on the edge. Right now, the Steelers pick is looking like it's probably going to be late teens, early 20s. The Texans pick is projected to be mid 20s. So if we end up having... if our pick ends up dropping down to the bottom end of the top 5, or maybe even out of the top 5, which is possible, and then if our other 2 first-round picks end up being at the back end of the draft, or the draft order, right, 15 or below, then it's not unreasonable that Stephen Ross, in his craven desperation to go get a quarterback, could trade up. And people have talked about this, and especially because of how the picks would be valued at that point, they could trade up with the Bengals. If they end up getting the number 1 pick, we could end up... I would not put it past Stephen Ross and this regime to trade away all 3 of those first round picks if they end up falling somewhere around where I just said that they could, to go up and get Tua. That would be the worst thing that they could do, because then there goes all of that first round draft capital that you got this year, part of one of the big sticking points for why you guys decided to do this whole thing to begin with. And then you go up to get a quarterback who's a little bit undersized and has injury problems and significant injury history, and then you're going to put him behind an offensive line that is almost non-existent, and think that maybe one... But then if you trade away that, then you wouldn't even have any other first round picks to get an offensive lineman higher in the first round to protect him. Then you would only have... I guess you would have, the other rounds of the draft to address it as well. But then you'd be done in the first round, unless I guess maybe you traded back up into the first round. But then that would be even more of a disaster, because then you'd be getting rid of even more draft capital. But anyway, and they've already said they're going to be massive spenders in free agency. So they think that, right now it stands at best, they're hoping that, one first round offensive lineman and a couple high priced free agents are going to be able to protect Tua or whoever they pick. But if that scenario ended up playing out and they ended up trading away their other 2 first round picks, because that's what would be needed to move up to the number 1 spot to usurp with the Bengals, right? To trade with the Bengals potentially, because they're the front runner right now. To get that quarterback, and they don't necessarily need somebody. They still do have Andy Dalton, and they wouldn't necessarily. And if we gave them those picks, I mean, they could get a quarterback still. They wouldn't be in massive desperation to get a quarterback. They could run us for all of that capital. That is a potential. That is a distinct possibility. So let's keep all that in mind too. We have to wait and see how the rest of this year goes. I mean, we're obviously not going to make it the playoffs. We're going to lose the majority of our games, you know, at best. And, you know, obviously this would be a pleasant surprise for me. And certainly on my expectations and predictions for the beginning of the season. But again, though, this isn't really much of an accomplishment. But if we end up winning 2 or 3 games, that would be a pleasant surprise for me, and it would exceed my expectations. But that's still a massive failure and not even close to mediocre. You guys are upset about being mediocre. We're not going to get to 6 wins. That shit is not going to happen. At most, we might beat the Bengals and we might beat the Jets again. But then that hurts our draft. So, I mean, again, like, to me, it's just with the way that this is all going, it's almost just like a no-win situation. For now, we're going to have a dismal season. That's virtually guaranteed at this point. And the future is almost assuredly going to be a failure for all kinds of reasons. We're going to have massive roster turnover next year. They got to make sure that they handle the draft correctly, prioritize correctly, and then hit on their picks, blah, 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 blah. There could be even a lockout after the 2020 season. We might not even have football in 2021. There's all kinds of shit, dude. Anyway, so I've been like this video is definitely like hella long, so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it there. I think you guys get the idea. Again, at the end of the day, though, I'm happy that we avoided going in 0-16 and we got a fucking win, but it was not on the coaching staff. And again, the overall picture here is they tried, man. They tried to give it away, but a bad beat up team that got victimized by officiating was overcome by the players on the field. They were not overcome by the coaching staff. Not at all. So, yeah, that's how it is, man. Let's go. And, you know, I mean, like I said, next week we got the Colts in Indy. I expect that'll be a loss. The Bills game after that, I expect will be a loss. And then, let's see, where do we go from there? It might be the next game. Oh, no. Okay, so real quick before I wrap this up, our next game is in Indianapolis against the Colts. They just lost to the Steelers today, but it's going to be a home game for them. They're, you know, looking to go to the playoffs. They're going to want to come out strong and fierce. That's our only 1 o'clock Pacific, 4 o'clock Eastern time game that we have. All the rest of them are 10 o'clock in the morning. But they're going to want to come out and, you know, play hard, play fierce. And again, there's substantial evidence to show that this coaching staff is trying to lose. Not the players, but the coaching staff. So I expect that we'll probably lose that one. We'll probably lose against the Bills. Then after that, we play against the Browns in Cleveland. That could be a winnable game, but that's going to be on the road. At that point, you know, we could likely be 1-9, guaranteed to already have a losing season. I mean, we're close, you know, one more loss and at best we could have, mathematically, at best we could have a 500 season. But at that point we could be, you know, 1-9 going against the Browns. They definitely have a far more talented team. They do already have a couple wins under their belt, and it will be a home game for them. So we could, and with the coaching staff continuing to try and lose, you know, then, you know, we'll see how that one goes. After that, we play the Eagles in Miami. Pretty sure that's going to be a loss. Then we go up to New York to play the Jets. That is a winnable game. We'll see how that goes. Then we go to the Giants, and that's also an away game in New York. I think we'll probably end up winning that game. We'll see how things go, you know, at that point. And then the game after the Giants game is the Bengals game. That's our last home game, and then we end the season in Foxborough. So we're going to get just, I'm pretty sure we're going to get, like, destroyed in that game. Yeah. Anyway, so, I mean, we'll see. There's definitely some opportunities down the stretch. I'm still not particularly confident in, you know, many more wins, if any, considering, you know, all of those other factors. the evidence to suggest that the coaching staff is very much on board with the tank. And of course, also simply because of the fact that, I mean, that's literally the purpose of this entire season. And the order came from Stephen Ross. The order was received, accepted, and executed by Chris Greer, Marvin Allen, Reggie McKenzie, and Brian Flores. So we'll see how the rest of this year plays out. Again, final thing, positive note, we fucking won. And I'm so glad that we were able to come away with a victory and we are not 0-16. And hopefully, if this team, if the players can keep fighting, man, because they're going to keep, you know, at the very least, they're going to keep fighting for their careers and contracts and so on and so forth. So at the very least, if they can keep fighting, maybe we can squeak out another couple wins. I don't give two fucks about the fucking draft position. And I just want to get more wins and hopefully avoid also being the worst team to ever exist on both sides of the ball. So this actually was a positive step in that direction, the best one we've had to this point. So let's see if we can keep that momentum going. And I think that's a wonderful place to end this video. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get up out of here. I hope you guys enjoy my videos. If you do, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the bell if you want to get the alerts. Make sure you share my channel and my videos with your friends and family. Leave your questions, comments, and concerns down in the comment section. And of course, as always, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Dillon Tartaro. And with that, I am out. I'll see y'all soon. Fins up.